The silence in Patricia's formal dining room was deafening. 8-year-old Emma stood clutching a handmade poster board, her little brother Lucas beside her, holding a manila folder stuffed with papers. Around the mahogany table sat our entire extended family, Easter brunch half finished, all eyes on my 2 children who had just asked to make a presentation. Patricia Williams, my mother-in-law, sat rigid in her chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. Just 20 minutes earlier, she had looked directly at Emma and Lucas and said the words that shattered everything we thought we knew about family. "You're not my real grandchildren. I don't understand why you're even here." What happened next wasn't something any of us saw coming, least of all Patricia. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like every other Easter Sunday at the Williams house in Salem, Oregon. Patricia had everything arranged to perfection, just like she had for the past 30 years. The dining room table gleamed under the morning light, filtering through her lace curtains, set with her grandmother's china and fresh daffodils from her garden. In the kitchen, her famous lemon bars cooled on wire racks while the ham roasted in the oven. The house smelled like spring and tradition, like a place where memories were made and family bonds were supposed to grow stronger with each passing year. Emma and Lucas had been up since dawn, their excitement bubbling over as they got dressed in their Easter outfits. Emma had chosen a soft yellow dress that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes, while Lucas wrestled with his clip-on tie, determined to look grown up for what he kept calling the fancy dinner. They had worked for weeks on something special, whispering together in their shared bedroom, crafting what they proudly called their family project. I had glimpsed pieces of it construction paper covered in careful 8-year-old handwriting, photographs glued with slightly crooked precision, and Lucas's attempts at spelling words like grandmother and belonging. My husband Michael had been unusually quiet during the 45-minute drive from Portland to Salem. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly, and I caught him glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. We had been making this drive for 2 years now, ever since Emma and Lucas officially became ours, and each time felt like walking a tightrope. Patricia had never been outright cruel, but her politeness toward our children felt sharp-edged, like kindness, with an expiration date. "Mom, are you sure Grandma Pat likes us?" Emma had asked from the back seat as we pulled into the familiar driveway lined with blooming cherry trees. The question hit me like a physical blow because I wasn't sure how to answer honestly without breaking her heart. Lucas, oblivious to the undercurrents, was already unbuckling his seatbelt and bouncing with anticipation. "Of course she does, sweetheart," I managed, hating myself for the lie even as I told it. "She just shows love differently than some people." The truth was more complicated than an 8-year-old could understand. Patricia Williams had raised 3 sons in this house, had been an elementary school teacher for 37 years, and had very specific ideas about what constituted a proper family. When Michael and I got married 3 years ago, she had welcomed me with the kind of warmth reserved for someone who might give her biological grandchildren. When we adopted Emma and Lucas through Oregon Children's Services, that warmth had cooled to something that felt more like tolerance. Emma and Lucas had come to us as siblings, which made their placement more challenging, but also more precious. They had been in the foster system for 18 months after being removed from a home where love had been inconsistent and safety was never guaranteed. Emma, even at 6 when we first met her, carried herself like someone who had learned not to expect too much from adults. Lucas, 4 at the time, still believed in the possibility of belonging somewhere permanently. Their social worker, Ms. Rodriguez, had warned us that sibling adoptions required extra patience, that these children would test boundaries to see if we would keep them when things got difficult. We never wavered, not once. From the moment Emma shyly asked if she could help me make pancakes on their first morning in our Portland townhouse, I knew these children were meant to be ours. When Lucas fell asleep against Michael's shoulder during their first movie night, his little hand clutching my husband's shirt like an anchor. Michael's eyes had filled with tears. We weren't just gaining children. We were finally becoming the family we had dreamed of building. The legal adoption process had taken 8 months of home visits, court appearances, and paperwork that seemed endless. But the day the judge signed the final decree, making Emma Rose Williams and Lucas James Williams our children permanently and legally, felt like the most important day of our lives. We had celebrated with ice cream sundaes and a trip to the Oregon coast, where the kids collected shells, and we took hundreds of photos of our new family of 4. Patricia had attended the finalization hearing, sitting in the back row of the courtroom wearing a navy dress and an expression I couldn't decipher. When the judge announced that the adoption was complete, she had clapped politely, the same way she might applaud at a school concert. That evening, when we called to share our joy, she had said all the right words, but they felt hollow, like lines from a script she was reading without conviction. Michael had grown up in this house, had learned to ride a bike on these sidewalks, had carved his initials in the old oak tree that still dominated the backyard. He understood his mother in ways that sometimes frustrated me, knowing exactly which battles to fight and which to let slide. "She'll come around," he would say, whenever. I mentioned Patricia's coolness toward the children. She just needs time to adjust. Change has never been easy for her. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that love could grow where it had been planted, even in rocky soil. But as months passed, and Patricia continued to treat Emma and Lucas like polite house guests rather than beloved grandchildren, my patience began wearing thin. She remembered every cousin's birthday but forgot when Lucas lost his first tooth. She displayed school photos of all her other grandchildren on her refrigerator, but somehow never found space for the ones we sent. When Emma drew her a picture of their vegetable garden with a note that said, "For Grandma Pat with love," it disappeared into a drawer rather than finding a place on the kitchen windowsill where other grandchild artwork was proudly displayed. The morning air in Salem carried the scent of spring rain and blooming fruit trees as we walked up the familiar brick pathway to Patricia's front door. The house looked exactly as it always did, perfectly maintained, with white shutters freshly painted and flower boxes already planted with seasonal blooms. This was a house where tradition mattered, where family recipes were passed down through generations, where being a Williams meant something specific and unchanging. Emma rang the doorbell, standing tall beside her little brother, both of them, clutching the project they had worked so hard to prepare. When Patricia opened the door, she was wearing her good pearls and the smile she reserved for company. "Happy Easter," she said, accepting the obligatory hugs from the children with the kind of stiffness that made my chest tighten. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Everyone's already here. We were just waiting for you." The house buzzed with familiar chaos as we entered. Michael's brother David and his wife Amanda were in the kitchen helping with final preparations, while their children Sophia and Tyler raced through the living room in their Easter finery. David's son Ethan, just 5 years old, was showing off his new light-up sneakers to anyone who would pay attention. This was the kind of scene I had imagined Emma and Lucas would seamlessly blend into, where they would feel the unconditional acceptance that comes with being part of something bigger than yourself. But as I watched Patricia's face light up when Tyler showed her his missing tooth, as I saw her bend down to properly admire Ethan's shoes and ask detailed questions about Sophia's piano recital, I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. Her attention to the other grandchildren was genuine, warm, completely natural. With Emma and Lucas, every interaction felt measured, careful, like she was checking off boxes on a list of grandmother duties. Emma noticed too. I saw it in the way her shoulders tensed slightly when Patricia patted her head absently, before turning away to fuss over Sophia's dress. I saw it in how Lucas's excited chatter about his school science project was met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear," while Ethan's identical story about building a volcano received enthusiastic questions and promises to see pictures. The Easter. Brunch itself was a masterpiece of Patricia's organizational skills. The dining room table groaned under the weight of her legendary spread-glazed ham studded with cloves, fresh asparagus from her garden, homemade rolls that seemed to float rather than rise, and a dozen other dishes that spoke of hours of preparation and decades of practice. Place cards written in her careful script marked where each family member should sit, with Emma and Lucas relegated to the far end of the table, while the other grandchildren flanked Patricia like an honor guard. The conversation flowed around. Topics I recognized from countless other family gatherings: David's promotion at work, Amanda's new part-time job, plans for summer vacations, and updates on extended family members who lived in other states. The children chattered about school and friends and the Easter egg hunt they were all anticipating. Emma and Lucas participated as much as they could, but I noticed how their contributions were acknowledged briefly before the conversation moved on, while the other children's comments sparked follow-up questions and genuine engagement. "Grandma?" "Pat," Sophia announced importantly. "I got straight A's on my report card this quarter." Patricia beamed and immediately began praising her granddaughter's academic achievement, asking about specific subjects and promising a special celebration. Dinner. "I got good grades too," Emma said softly, hope threading through her voice. "I got an A on my book report about Charlotte's Web." "That's wonderful, dear," Patricia replied without looking up from cutting Ethan's ham into smaller pieces. The conversation immediately shifted to Tyler's upcoming soccer season, and Emma's literary achievement evaporated into the air like it had never been spoken. Michael caught my eye across the table, and I saw my own frustration reflected in his expression. He cleared his throat and tried to redirect attention. "Emma's teacher said her writing is really advanced for her grade level. She's thinking about entering a poetry contest." Patricia nodded politely, but didn't ask to see any of Emma's poems or express interest in the contest details. Instead, she launched into a story about Sophia's art class project, displaying the kind of grandmother pride that Emma had been hoping to inspire. The gift exchange came after brunch, another Williams family tradition that had been elevated to near ceremonial status. Patricia disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a stack of beautifully wrapped packages, each one tagged with careful calligraphy. She had always been thoughtful about gifts, choosing items that reflected each child's interests and personality. Sophia received an expensive set of colored pencils for her artistic pursuits. Tyler got a remote-controlled car he had been wanting. Ethan unwrapped a collection of dinosaur figures that made him squeal with delight. Emma and Lucas sat perfectly still, watching their cousins tear through wrapping paper with growing excitement. I kept scanning the remaining gifts, looking for their names, feeling that familiar dread building in my chest. When the last package was distributed and no gifts remained for my children, the silence felt thunderous. "Grandma Pat," Lucas said in his clear 6-year-old voice, "did you forget our presents?" Patricia looked directly at him, her expression shifting to something I had never seen before: cold, almost annoyed, like he had asked an inappropriate question. "I didn't forget anything," she said, her voice carrying an edge that made every adult in the room freeze. "You're not my real grandchildren. I don't understand why you're even here." The words hit the room like a physical force. Amanda's fork clattered against her plate. David stopped mid-chew and stared at his mother in shock. Michael's face went white, then red, then white again. But it was Emma's reaction that broke my heart completely. She didn't cry, didn't protest, didn't even look surprised. She just nodded slowly, like Patricia had confirmed something she had suspected all along. "Oh," Emma said quietly, her voice steady in a way that made me want to scream. "Okay, that makes sense." Lucas looked confused, glancing between his sister and Patricia like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "But we call you Grandma," he said, his voice smaller now. "And we live with Mom and Dad." "That doesn't make you family," Patricia replied, her tone matter-of-fact, like she was explaining that the sky was blue or that water was wet. Family is blood. You can't just decide to be related to people. The silence that followed felt endless. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody seemed to even breathe. I sat frozen, my mind reeling between rage and disbelief, between the urge to grab my children and run, and the desperate need to somehow fix this moment before it scarred them permanently. But then Emma stood up. She walked around the table to where she and Lucas had left their project, that manila folder and poster board they had worked on so secretly and so proudly. Lucas followed her, and together they returned to stand in front of Patricia's chair. "Grandma Pat," Emma said, her voice stronger now, more determined. "Lucas and I made something for you. We wanted to show you before, but now seems like the right time." She looked around the table at all the adults who had failed to speak up for them, her 8-year-old dignity more powerful than any of our shocked silence. "We made a presentation about families, about what makes people belong to each other." Patricia's expression shifted from annoyed to confused. "A presentation?" "Yes, ma'am," Lucas chimed in, his earlier confusion replaced by excitement about their project. "We worked really hard on it. Emma did most of the writing, but I helped with the pictures." Emma carefully unfolded their poster board, revealing a colorful display titled, "What Makes a Family," in her careful third-grade handwriting. The board was covered with photographs Michael and I recognized from their time with us, mixed with drawings in crayon and marker, and text written in Emma's precise script. "We researched it," Emma announced with the seriousness of a graduate student presenting a thesis. "We asked our teacher, Mrs. Patterson, and we looked at books in the library, and we asked Mom and Dad lots of questions." She pointed to the top of the poster. "Here's what we learned about families." What happened next was something none of us expected, least of all Patricia. These two children, who had just been rejected and dismissed, were about to teach a room full of adults what family really meant, and their lesson was going to change everything. Emma cleared her throat with the kind of formality that only children can muster when they're trying to be taken seriously by adults. She had positioned herself directly in front of Patricia's chair, the poster board propped against the mahogany sideboard, while Lucas stood beside her holding their manila folder like it contained state secrets. The dining room felt charged, with an energy I couldn't name, something between anticipation and dread, as if we were all waiting for a verdict none of us were prepared to hear. "The first thing we learned," Emma began, reading from index cards she had prepared, "is that families come in lots of different shapes. Some families are made when babies are born, and some families are made when people choose each other." She pointed to a section of their poster where she had carefully glued magazine cutouts showing different types of families, single parents with children, grandparents raising grandchildren, blended families, adopted families. Mrs. Patterson told us that what matters isn't how a family starts, but how they love each other every day. Lucas stepped forward, his small finger tracing over a drawing he had made in green crayon. "This is our house in Portland," he announced proudly. "Emma and I each have our own room, but sometimes we have sleepovers in the living room. Dad makes pancakes that look like dinosaurs, and Mom reads us stories before bed even when we can brush our teeth by ourselves." I felt my throat tighten watching these two children, who just moments before had been told they didn't belong, now standing with such dignity and purpose. Emma flipped to the next section of their presentation, revealing a timeline she had constructed with photographs and careful annotations. "This part shows how we became a family," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. The timeline began with a photo Michael and I had taken on the day we first met Emma and Lucas at the Children's Services office. Emma looked so small in that picture, her hand gripping Lucas's tightly, both of them wearing clothes that were clean but didn't quite fit. "This was the day we met Mom and Dad," Emma explained, her finger tracing the date she had written in purple marker. I was 6 and Lucas was 4. We had been waiting for a family for a really long time. She moved to the next photo, taken a week later during their first visit to our house. This was when Dad showed us how to make his special hot chocolate, with the little marshmallows. Lucas spilled his on the carpet, but nobody got mad. Mom just cleaned it up and made him a new cup. The memory was so vivid in my mind, watching Lucas's eyes go wide with wonder when Michael handed him that steaming mug, seeing Emma relax slightly when I casually wiped up the spill without any frustration. "And this," Lucas chimed in excitedly, pointing to a photo from their second visit, "is when Mom let us help her plant flowers in the backyard. Emma picked yellow ones because they reminded her of sunshine, and I picked red ones because they looked like fire trucks." His enthusiasm was infectious, and I saw Amanda lean forward slightly, drawn into their story despite the tension still crackling in the room. The timeline continued through their placement, the gradual settling in, the small milestones that had marked their journey from scared foster children to confident family members. Emma had documented Lucas's first lost tooth, her own first successful bike ride without training wheels, family movie nights, trips to the Oregon coast, ordinary. Tuesday dinners that had felt extraordinary because they were together. "Here's when we started calling them Mom and Dad," Emma said, pointing to a photo from about 6 months after placement. "We didn't have to, nobody made us, but it felt right, like those were their real names." The photo showed all 4 of us, at a pumpkin patch, Emma and Lucas flanking Michael and me, their faces bright with genuine happiness. Patricia had remained silent during this presentation, her expression unreadable. The other adults around the table seemed frozen, caught between the children's earnest presentation and the devastating words Patricia had spoken just minutes before. David kept glancing between his mother and the children, his jaw working like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Amanda had tears in her eyes, though she was trying to hide them behind her coffee cup. "The next part of our research," Emma continued, flipping to a new section of their poster, "was about what makes someone a grandparent." This section was more complex, filled with Emma's careful handwriting and what appeared to be interview notes. "We asked lots of people about their grandparents. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, told us that her grandmother taught her how to make dumplings and always remembered her favorite color. Our friend Marcus said his grandpa takes him fishing and knows all his friends' names." Lucas had brightened considerably during this section, bouncing slightly on his toes. "We made a list," he announced, pulling a piece of construction paper from their folder. "All the things we thought grandparents do." He began reading in his careful 6-year-old voice, sounding out some of the bigger words Emma had helped him write. "Grandparents give hugs when you're sad. They remember your birthday. They keep pictures of you in their house. They teach you things their own kids used to like. They tell you stories about when your mom or dad was little." Emma took over the reading as Lucas struggled with some of the longer words. "They come to your school plays and soccer games. They have special treats at their house that you only get there. They let you help them cook or garden or fix things. They make you feel proud to be part of their family." With each item Emma read, I felt my heart break a little more, because it was becoming painfully clear where this presentation was heading. "And then," Emma said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering crucial evidence, "we started thinking about you, Grandma Pat." She flipped to the final section of their poster, and I gasped despite myself. This section was covered with photographs I recognized, pictures I hadn't even realized the children had been paying attention to during our visits to Salem. "This is from Christmas 2 years ago," Emma said, pointing to a photo of Patricia showing Lucas how to hang an ornament on her tree. In the picture, Patricia was smiling genuinely, her hand guiding his small fingers as he placed a silver bell on a low branch. "You taught Lucas the right way to hang ornaments so they wouldn't fall off. You said your mom taught you the same way when you were little." Lucas took over, his excitement building again. "And this is from last summer when you showed me your tomato plants. You said the secret was talking to them every day and making sure they got enough water, but not too much. The photo showed Patricia kneeling in her garden, Lucas crouched beside her, both of them examining a tomato plant with serious concentration. This one is from Emma's birthday last year, Emma continued, pointing to a photo of Patricia helping her blow out candles on a cake. You remembered that I like chocolate, cake better than vanilla, and you made sure there were enough candles for me to make a really good wish. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion building underneath. The children continued through their collection of evidence, Patricia teaching Emma how to fold napkins into swans for a fancy dinner, showing Lucas how to identify different birds at her backyard feeder, letting both children help her make lemon bars for a church potluck. Each photograph captured moments I had witnessed, but perhaps not fully appreciated. Moments when Patricia had stepped naturally into the role of grandmother without seeming to realize it herself. And then we found these, Lucas announced, pulling out what appeared to be copies of photographs. Mom helped us print them from Grandma Pat's computer when she went to get more coffee. My stomach dropped, wondering what they had discovered and how they had managed to access Patricia's computer without her knowledge. Emma arranged the photographs on the table where everyone could see them. They were pictures Patricia had taken during our visits, pictures I hadn't known existed. Emma and Lucas playing in the backyard, Lucas helping Patricia water her plants, Emma reading a book in Patricia's living room, the four of us together at various family gatherings. What struck me most was that these weren't the kind of pictures someone takes out of obligation. They were the pictures you take because you want to remember moments, because the people in them matter to you. We found a whole folder on your computer labeled Emma and Lucas, Emma said, her 8-year-old voice carrying a weight that seemed far beyond her years. There were lots of pictures, and some videos too, like the one of Lucas singing that song from school, and the one of me reading to him on your porch swing. The silence in the room had shifted quality. Where before it had been shocked and uncomfortable, now it felt heavy with realization. Patricia's face had gone very pale, and her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She was staring at the photographs spread across her dining room table as if seeing them for the first time, even though she had been the one to take them. The last part of our research, Emma said, her voice beginning to shake, slightly, was about what we learned about you, Grandma Pat. She pulled out a final piece of paper, this one covered with her most careful handwriting, the kind she usually reserved for important school assignments. We learned that you were a teacher for a really long time, and that you always said, every child in your classroom was special and deserved to feel important. Lucas nodded seriously. Emma asked Mom to help her find some of your old students on Facebook, and they told us stories about you. Mrs. Johnson's daughter Sarah said you helped her learn to read when other teachers said she was too slow, and Mr. Martinez said you came to his high school graduation even though he hadn't been in your class for 8 years. They said you always told kids that family isn't just about who you're born to, but about who chooses to love you and never gives up on you, Emma continued, reading from her notes. Sarah said you used to tell your class that some of the best families are the ones that have to work a little harder to find each other, because that means they really wanted to be together. I watched Patricia's face as Emma read these words that had apparently come from her own mouth years before in her elementary school classroom. The irony was devastating, and I could see in Patricia's expression that she was beginning to understand the contradiction between the teacher she had been and the grandmother she was choosing to be. So we got confused, Lucas said, his 6-year-old honesty cutting through the tension like a knife. Because all the things you taught other kids about families, and all the ways you act like our grandma when you think nobody's paying attention, don't match what you said today about us not being real grandchildren. Emma pulled out one final item from their folder, and my breath caught when I realized what it was. A Mother's Day card she had made at school, one I remembered her working on with intense concentration several weeks earlier. She had decorated it with careful drawings of flowers and hearts, and inside, in her best handwriting, she had written, Dear Grandma Pat, Thank you for teaching me how to make lemon bars and for always having band-aids when I scrape my knee. You make me feel special and loved. I hope I make you proud to be my grandma. Love, Emma. I was going to give this to you next month, Emma said, holding the card but not yet offering it. But now I don't know if you want it, since you said we're not really your grandchildren. Her voice remained steady, but I could see tears forming in her eyes for the first time since this whole devastating scene had begun. Lucas stepped closer to his sister, his small hand finding hers. Emma worked really hard on that card, he said, his voice serious. She erased the words like 100 times to make sure they were spelled right. And she asked Mom what your favorite flowers were, so she could draw the right ones. The card seemed to hang in the air between Emma and Patricia, representing everything that had been building and breaking in our family for the past 2 years. Patricia's eyes were fixed on it, and I could see something cracking in her expression. Some wall she had built beginning to crumble under the weight of these children's innocent honesty. We just want to understand, Emma said, her voice finally beginning to break. Because it feels like you love us sometimes, like when you teach us things or take pictures of us or make sure we get the cookies we like best. But then sometimes it feels like you're angry that we're here, like we're taking up space that belongs to someone else. We didn't mean to take anyone's space, Lucas added quickly, his own tears starting to flow. We just wanted to be part of the family. We thought that's what happened when people adopt you, that you get to belong to everyone, not just your new mom and dad. The silence that followed was different from any of the previous silences. This one felt full rather than empty, heavy with the weight of truth that had been spoken by 2 children who shouldn't have had to speak it. Patricia's face had transformed completely, the coldness and irritation replaced by something that looked like shock, like someone waking up from a dream they hadn't realized they were having. David was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse with emotion. Mom, he said quietly, what they're saying is true. You do act like their grandmother. I've watched you with them. You light up when Emma shows you her drawings and you always remember what Lucas is learning in school. Amanda nodded, wiping away tears she had stopped trying to hide. When Emma helped you make those cookies for the church bake sale, you bragged about her to everyone there. You said she had the gentlest hands for rolling dough you'd ever seen. Patricia looked around the table at her family, at the faces of people she loved, all of them reflecting the same realization. The evidence was overwhelming, spread out in photographs and memories, and the innocent testimony of 2 children who had been paying attention when she thought no one was watching. I don't understand, Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't understand how this happened. She was looking at the photographs, at the evidence of her own affection, as if they belonged to someone else. I told myself I was just being polite. I told myself I was just trying to make the best of a difficult situation. Michael spoke for the first time since the children had begun their presentation, his voice carefully controlled. Mom, what you told yourself doesn't match what you felt. And it definitely doesn't match how you acted. He gestured toward the photographs. Nobody takes pictures of kids they don't care about. Nobody keeps videos of children singing unless those children matter to them. But they're not, Patricia started, then stopped, the words seeming to catch in her throat. They're not my blood. They're not really part of our family tree. I thought that mattered. I thought that was what made the difference. Emma, still holding her Mother's Day card, took a small step forward. Grandma Pat, she said, her voice gentle in a way that broke my heart. Can I ask you something? Patricia nodded, not trusting her voice. When you taught school, did you love your students? Of course I did, Patricia answered immediately. But they weren't your blood either, Emma pointed out with 8-year-old logic. But you still chose to love them and help them and make them feel important. She paused, thinking. Lucas and I think that love is something you choose to do, not something that just happens because you're related to someone. Lucas nodded, sagely. Like how Dad chose to love us even before the judge said we were officially his kids. And how Mom chose to love us before she even knew if we would be good at being her children. He looked directly at Patricia. We were hoping you might choose to love us too, but we understand if you can't. Some things are harder for grown-ups than for kids. The simplicity of his statement, the gentle forgiveness in his voice, seemed to shatter something in Patricia. She looked at these two children who had just presented a careful, thoughtful case for their inclusion in her family, who had shown her evidence of her own love that she had been denying, who had offered her forgiveness for hurting them in the most fundamental way possible. She started, then stopped, her composed facade finally cracking completely. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to make you feel unwanted. Her voice was shaking now, the careful control she had maintained for years beginning to dissolve. I was scared. I was scared that if I loved you the way I wanted to, something would happen. That you would be taken away, or that loving you would somehow diminish my love for my other grandchildren, or that I was betraying some idea I had about what family was supposed to look like. Emma and Lucas exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that siblings share. Then Emma stepped forward and held out the Mother's Day card. You don't have to be scared anymore, Grandma Pat, she said simply. We're not going anywhere. Mom and Dad adopted us forever, which means you're stuck with us forever too, if you want to be. Patricia took the card with trembling hands, and, as she opened it and read Emma's careful words, the tears she had been holding back finally came. They weren't quiet, dignified tears, but the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep you didn't know it existed, the kind that shakes your whole body and changes something fundamental inside you. I do want to be stuck with you, she whispered, looking up at Emma and Lucas through her tears. I want to be stuck with you forever. I want to be your real grandmother, not just by marriage or by law, but in every way that matters. She reached out tentatively, and both children moved into her arms without hesitation, as if they had been waiting for this moment since the day they first met her. The embrace lasted for a long time, long enough for the rest of us to wipe away our own tears and begin to understand that something had fundamentally shifted in our family. When they finally separated, Patricia kept her hands on the children's shoulders, as if she was afraid they might disappear if she let go. I have something I need to show you, she said, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. Something I should have shown you a long time ago. She stood up and walked over to the built-in hutch that held her most precious family treasures. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a leather photo album I had never seen before. I started this the day you came home with Michael and Jessica, she said, settling back into her chair with Emma and Lucas pressed close to her sides. I told myself it was just documentation, just keeping track of family events. But really, I was keeping track of you. She opened the album, and I gasped. The first page held the photo from their adoption finalization day, the one where Patricia sat in the back row of the courtroom. But this copy had been carefully matted and labeled in her precise handwriting. Emma Rose Williams and Lucas James Williams, Official Family Day. The album continued with photographs from every visit, every holiday, every ordinary moment she had captured. Emma's first successful attempt at riding a bike in Patricia's driveway. Lucas helping her plant her vegetable garden. Both children asleep on her couch after a big family dinner. Page after page of evidence that she had been documenting their childhood just as carefully as she had documented her other grandchildren's milestones. I was keeping this for you, she said quietly, for when you got older. I thought maybe someday you would want to see how much you had always belonged here, even when I was too stubborn and scared to admit it. She turned to a page near the end of the album, where she had collected school photos, report cards, and artwork they had given her. I kept everything, every drawing, every card, every little note, because they were treasures, even when I was pretending they weren't. Emma traced her finger over a photo of herself helping Patricia decorate Christmas cookies, a moment I remembered from the previous year. "You really do love us," she said, wonder in her voice. "I really do," Patricia confirmed, pulling both children closer. "I love you so much it scared me. I've never been good at loving people I might lose, and I thought that if I kept some distance, if I didn't admit how much you meant to me, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much if something happened." She looked at Michael, then at me. "But I realize now that I was hurting you and hurting myself, and missing out on the joy of being your grandmother because I was so afraid of the pain of possibly losing you." Lucas looked up at her with his earnest 6-year-old expression. "But Grandma Pat, we're not going anywhere. When people adopt you, it's forever. Even if we grow up and move away someday, we'll still be your grandchildren. That's how families work." Patricia laughed through her tears, a sound I had never heard from her before, warm and rich and full of genuine joy. "You're absolutely right, Lucas. That is how families work, and I promise you, both of you, that I will never again make you doubt whether you belong here. You are my grandchildren, really and truly and forever, and I am so proud to be your grandmother." Emma leaned against Patricia's side, finally relaxing in a way I had never seen her do in this house before. "Can we have Easter egg hunts here? Every year?" she asked hopefully. "And can you teach me how to make those lemon bars like you promised?" "Every year," Patricia promised. "And we'll start the lemon bar lessons today if you want. I have all the ingredients and I think it's time you learned the family recipe." She paused, her voice growing serious again. "Emma, Lucas, I owe you both an apology, a real one. What I said earlier was cruel and wrong, and there's no excuse for it. You deserved better from me, and you're going to get better from me starting right now." "It's okay, Grandma Pat," Lucas said with the easy forgiveness that children seem to carry naturally. "Everybody makes mistakes sometimes. Dad says what matters is what you do after you realize you made a mistake." "Your dad is very wise," Patricia said, looking at Michael with an expression that held apology and gratitude and love all mixed together. "And you are very generous to forgive me when I don't deserve it." "You do deserve it," Emma said firmly, "because we could tell. You loved us even when you were trying not to. Love is hard to hide, especially from kids. We're really good at seeing it, even when grown-ups think they're being sneaky." The transformation in the room was remarkable. Where before there had been tension and hurt and the sharp edges of rejection, now there was warmth and relief and the beginning of something new and better. The other family members who had witnessed this entire exchange seemed to relax for the first time all day. The weight of unspoken conflict finally lifted from all our shoulders. Amanda reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm sorry. We didn't speak up earlier," she said quietly. "We should have said something when she made that comment. It wasn't right to leave you and the kids to handle that alone." David nodded, his own eyes still red from tears. "Mom, I love you, but what you said was completely out of line. Those kids are part of this family, and they always have been. I should have made that clear a long time ago." "You shouldn't have had to," Patricia said, her voice firm with resolve. "This was my failing, my fear, my mistake to correct." She looked around the table at her family, her real family, now finally complete in a way it had never been before. "Emma and Lucas, would you like to help me get the Easter baskets? I have ones for each of you, ones I made weeks ago but was too foolish to give you." The children's faces lit up with excitement, and they scrambled to follow Patricia toward the kitchen. As they disappeared through the doorway, I heard Emma's voice, clear and happy. "Grandma Pat, do you think next year we could help you make Easter baskets for all the kids? Lucas is really good at arranging the grass, and I know how to tie really pretty bows." "I think that sounds perfect," came Patricia's reply, her voice full of the warmth that had been missing for so long. "In fact, I think there are a lot of traditions we need to start, and a lot of catching up we need to do." Michael reached for my hand under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of shared relief and hope. We had come so close to losing something precious today, so close to allowing fear and stubbornness to destroy the family connections our children deserved. But sometimes, it takes the wisdom and courage of children to show adults what really matters, to cut through the complicated emotions and adult complications and get to the heart of what family really means. As laughter echoed from the kitchen where 3 generations were finally coming together the way they should have all along, I realized that this Easter would indeed be memorable, not for the pain that had started the day, but for the healing that had transformed it into something beautiful. The kitchen had transformed into something magical as Patricia, Emma, and Lucas worked together to prepare the Easter baskets that had been waiting in the pantry for weeks. I stood in the doorway watching this scene I had dreamed of but never quite believed would happen, seeing my mother-in-law's careful hands guiding Emma's smaller ones as they arranged chocolate eggs in wicker baskets lined with pastel tissue paper. Lucas was on his knees beside them, his tongue poking out in concentration as he placed jelly beans in precise patterns around the edges of each basket. The secret, Patricia was explaining to Emma, is to put the bigger items in first, then fill in the spaces with smaller candies. That way everything shows nicely and nothing gets squished. Her voice carried the patient tone I remembered from stories about her teaching days, the voice of someone who genuinely enjoyed sharing knowledge with eager young minds. "Like this, Grandma Pat?" Emma asked, holding up a chocolate bunny for inspection. The casual way she said Grandma Pat now, without the careful hesitation that had marked her speech for 2 years, made my chest tight with emotion. "Perfect, sweetheart. You're a natural at this." Patricia's face was soft in a way I had never seen before, the rigid lines of control and distance completely erased. "Lucas, would you like to write the name tags? I have special markers in the drawer." "I can write my own name and Emma's name," Lucas announced proudly. "And I know how to spell Tyler and Sophia and Ethan too." He scrambled to his feet and headed for the drawer Patricia had indicated, as comfortable in her kitchen as if he had been navigating it his entire life. Michael appeared beside me in the doorway, his arm sliding around my waist as we watched. Our children claim their place in a family tradition that had excluded them for too long. "I can't believe how different she is," he murmured, his voice full of wonder. "It's like watching someone remember who they used to be." "The children did that," I whispered back. "They didn't give up on her, even when she gave up on herself." The truth of that statement hit me as I spoke it. Emma and Lucas had somehow seen past Patricia's fear and rejection to the grandmother she was capable of being, and they had refused to accept anything less than her best self. From the dining room came the sounds of the rest of the family cleaning up from brunch, voices lighter now that the terrible tension had been broken. David and Amanda were discussing plans for the traditional Easter egg hunt in Patricia's backyard, their children already bouncing with anticipation. The normalcy of it felt precious after the emotional earthquake we had all just experienced. "Mom," Emma called from her position beside Patricia, "come look at what Grandma Pat has in her basement." Her eyes were bright with excitement, and I could see that whatever she had discovered had impressed her considerably. Patricia's cheeks flushed slightly pink. "I was saving it for a surprise," she admitted, "but I suppose there's no point in waiting anymore." She wiped her hands on a dish towel and gestured for Michael and me to follow her toward the basement stairs. "I've been working on something for the past few months, ever since I realized that maybe I had been approaching this whole situation wrong." The basement had always been Patricia's domain, a finished space where she pursued her various hobbies and stored family memorabilia. But as we descended the stairs, I could see that something had changed. The usually organized space looked like a workshop, with supplies scattered across the large table she typically used for her quilting projects. "I started this in January," Patricia said, her voice carrying a note of embarrassment. "I told myself I was just organizing family photos, but really I was trying to figure out how to make sense of my feelings about Emma and Lucas." She led us to the table, where I could see what appeared to be the beginnings of a massive scrapbook project. The table was covered with photographs, both printed and digital copies spread out in careful arrangements. There were pictures I recognized from family gatherings, but also many I had never seen Patricia take candid shots of the children playing, helping with household tasks, interacting with their cousins. She had been documenting their integration into the family far more thoroughly than any of us had realized. I thought maybe if I could organize the memories, I could organize my feelings, Patricia continued, her hands hovering over the photographs, as if she was afraid to touch them. But the more I worked on this, the more I realized that my feelings were already organized. I loved these children from the beginning. I was just too afraid to admit it. Emma had followed us downstairs and was examining the photographs with the intense curiosity that characterized everything she did. "Grandma Pat, is this going to be a book about our family?" she asked, picking up a photo of herself and Lucas building a snowman in Patricia's backyard during their visit last winter. "I wanted it to be a book about how you became part of our family," Patricia said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I wanted to document every moment, every milestone, every ordinary day that made you ours. I thought maybe when you got older, you could look through it and see how much you were loved, even during the times when I wasn't very good at showing it." Michael stepped closer to examine the scrapbook materials, and I could see his expression, shifting between amazement and something that looked like grief. "Mom, this is incredible. But why didn't you tell us you were doing this? Why did you keep it secret?" Patricia sank into the chair beside the table, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. "Because I was ashamed," she said simply. I was ashamed that I was documenting their childhood like any grandmother would, while simultaneously telling myself that they weren't really my grandchildren. I was ashamed that I was collecting evidence of my own love while denying that love existed. Lucas had discovered a box of craft supplies and was examining them with the fascination of a 6-year-old who lived for creative projects. "Are these for decorating the pages?" he asked, holding up a package of colorful stickers. "Emma's really good at making things pretty. She could help you if you want." "I would love Emma's help," Patricia said, and the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. "In fact, I was hoping both of you might want to help me finish this project. It's your story too, and I think it should include your voices, your memories, your perspective on how we became a family." Emma's face lit up with the kind of excitement she usually reserved for her most beloved art projects. "We could write about our favorite memories from visiting here," she suggested, already planning. "And Lucas could draw pictures to go with the photos. He's really good at drawing, especially animals and houses." "And we could interview everyone in the family," Lucas added, warming to the idea. "We could ask them about their favorite memories of us becoming part of the family. Like when Dad taught me to throw a baseball in your backyard, or when Emma helped you make cookies for your church friends." I watched Patricia's face as the children enthusiastically outlined their vision for the family scrapbook, saw how their automatic inclusion of her in their plans was transforming her understanding of her own role in their lives. For 2 years, she had been operating under the assumption that her connection to them was tenuous and temporary, something that could be maintained at a distance without causing pain to anyone. But their presentation upstairs, combined with this evidence of her own investment in their story, had forced her to confront the reality of her feelings. "There's something else I need to show you," Patricia said, rising from her chair and walking to a filing cabinet in the corner of the basement. She pulled out a manila folder similar to the one Emma and Lucas had used for their presentation, but thicker and more official looking. "I did this about 6 months ago, but I never told anyone because I wasn't sure I had the right." She handed the folder to Michael, who opened it with curious caution. His expression changed immediately, confusion giving way to understanding, and then to something that looked like profound emotion. "Mom, what is this?" "What is what?" I asked, moving to look over his shoulder. The folder contained legal documents, forms I recognized from our own adoption process, and what appeared to be financial paperwork. I consulted with a lawyer about grandparent rights in adoption cases, Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to understand what my legal relationship to Emma and Lucas was, what rights and responsibilities I had as their adoptive grandmother. But more than that, I wanted to understand what I could do to make sure they were protected. Michael was scanning through the documents, his expression growing more amazed with each page. You updated your will, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You added Emma and Lucas as beneficiaries, equal to all your other grandchildren. I opened college funds for them, Patricia continued, her words coming faster now as if she was afraid she might lose her courage. I added them to my health insurance as dependents while they're minors. I filed paperwork to ensure that if anything ever happened to you and Jessica, I would be considered as a potential guardian along with any other family members. I felt my knees go weak as the implications of what she was saying sank in. Patricia, you did all of this months ago? I told myself I was just being practical, she said, but her voice was shaking now. I told myself that legal protections were different from emotional attachments, that I could provide for their future without admitting that they had become central to mine. But the lawyer asked me a question that I couldn't answer honestly while maintaining that fiction. What? Question? Emma asked, her 8-year-old voice cutting through the adult conversation with typical directness. Patricia looked down at Emma, and I saw her face crumple slightly before she regained control. He asked me what I would do if someone tried to hurt you or Lucas, or if you needed something that I had the power to provide. And I realized that I would do anything, give anything, fight anyone who tried to harm you, which meant that you weren't just legal obligations to me. You were my grandchildren in every way that mattered. Lucas, who had been listening with the intense concentration he brought to important adult conversations, walked over to Patricia and slipped his small hand into hers. Grandma Pat, does this mean you were protecting us even when you were pretending not to love us? I was protecting you because I couldn't pretend not to love you, Patricia corrected gently. I could pretend in front of other people, and I could even pretend to myself sometimes. But when it came to making sure you were safe and provided for, my heart made the decisions my head was trying to deny. Emma had moved to Patricia's other side, and together the three of them created a picture that looked like it had always existed, like it had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Can we see the college fund papers? Emma asked with the practical curiosity that made her such a remarkable child. I want to understand how that works. Of course, Patricia said, her voice growing steadier as she moved into her teaching mode. Financial planning is an important skill to learn, and it's never too early to understand how education funding works. She began explaining the concept of college savings accounts in terms that an 8-year-old could grasp, and I marveled at how naturally she had shifted from rejecting these children to planning their futures. The most important thing to understand, Patricia continued, settling into her chair with Emma and Lucas flanking her, is that this isn't conditional love. This isn't something I'm doing because I expect anything in return, or something that depends on your behavior or your academic performance. This is what grandparents do for grandchildren, because family takes care of family, no matter what. Michael had been reading through the rest of the documents, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright with tears. Mom, you also set up emergency contact authorizations, medical decision-making provisions, even temporary custody arrangements in case Jessica and I were ever unable to care for them temporarily. He shook his head in amazement. You essentially made yourself their legal grandmother in every way the law allows. Because that's what I am, Patricia said, her voice finally carrying the conviction that had been missing for 2 years. I am their grandmother. Not because of biology, not because of obligation, but because I chose them and they chose me, even when I was too scared to acknowledge that choice. She looked at Emma and Lucas with an expression of such love and regret that it took my breath away. I wasted so much time being afraid of loving you. I wasted so many opportunities to tell you how proud I am of you, how much joy you bring to my life, how empty this house feels when you're not here. It's not too late, Emma said with the wisdom that sometimes emerged from her 8-year-old mouth like prophecy. We're still kids, so there's lots of time left for you to be our grandma. And besides, the best kind of love is when people choose it on purpose, not just because they have to. Lucas nodded seriously. And we already know you love us, Grandma Pat. We could tell by the way you remembered that I don't like coconut in my cookies, and the way you always made sure Emma had the right kind of crayons for her drawings. Love shows up in little things, even when people are trying to hide it. The basement had become a sanctuary where truth was finally being spoken, where the careful facades that had protected and imprisoned all of us were being dismantled piece by piece. Patricia's hobbies and projects surrounded us, evidence of a life lived with intention and care, and now Emma and Lucas were being invited to add their own creativity to that space. I want to finish the scrapbook together, Patricia said, her voice growing strong with purpose. I want us to tell the real story of how we became a family, including the parts where I made mistakes, including the parts where love had to overcome fear. I want you to know that families aren't perfect, but they're worth fighting for. Can we start today? Lucas asked eagerly. We could pick out the best pictures and start writing the stories to go with them. We can start right now, Patricia agreed, and there was something ceremonial about the way she said it, as if we were all participating in a ritual that would bind us together in a new way. But first, I think there are some Easter baskets upstairs that need to be delivered and an egg hunt that needs to happen. As we made our way back upstairs, I caught Michael's hand and squeezed it tightly. The transformation we had witnessed felt almost miraculous, but I understood now that it had been building for months, maybe even years. Patricia's love for Emma and Lucas had never been the question. The question had been whether she would allow herself to experience and express that love fully. The living room had been transformed in our absence, with David and Amanda arranging furniture to make space for the traditional Easter egg hunt preparations. Sophia, Tyler, and Ethan were bouncing with excitement, their energy infectious as they speculated about the treasures that might be hidden throughout the house and yard. Grandma Pat, Sophia called as we emerged from the basement. Are Emma and Lucas going to hunt for eggs with us? Because I want to make sure they know about the special golden egg that's always really hard to find. Of course they're hunting. With you, Patricia said, her voice carrying a warmth that made all the children beam. In fact, I think Emma and Lucas should be the ones to help me hide the eggs this year, since they know all the best hiding spots from playing in the house and yard. The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity, immediately establishing Emma and Lucas not as guests or outsiders, but as insiders with special knowledge and responsibility. I watched Emma's posture straighten with pride at being given this important role, and saw Lucas practically glow with the excitement of being trusted with such a significant family tradition. We know where all the good hiding spots are, Emma agreed. Her earlier shyness completely evaporated. There's this place behind the big oak tree where nobody ever looks, and a spot in the garden shed that's perfect for bigger prizes. And I know how to hide them so the little kids can find some easy ones, Lucas added, his natural kindness shining through. Ethan's only 5, so we should put some where he can reach them without having to climb. Patricia's face was radiant as she listened to the children plan, and I realized that this was what she had been missing all along. Not just the chance to love Emma and Lucas, but the chance to be loved by them in return, to be included in their world the way they had always wanted to be included in hers. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity as eggs were hidden throughout the house and yard with military precision. Patricia, Emma, and Lucas worked as a team, with the children offering suggestions and Patricia contributing her years of experience in creating the perfect balance of challenge and achievability. I watched from the kitchen window as they debated the merits of various hiding spots, their heads bent together in serious consultation. "She's a completely different person," Amanda said, joining me at the window. "I've never seen her like this with any of the grandchildren, not even when they were Emma and Lucas's age. I think maybe she's finally allowing herself to be the grandmother she always wanted to be," I replied, watching Patricia lift Lucas up so he could reach a high branch where they were placing a particularly special egg. Sometimes love needs permission to exist, and she finally gave herself that permission. When the hiding was complete, the real hunt began with all the ceremony that Patricia brought to every family tradition. The children lined up at the back door, Easter baskets in hand, vibrating with anticipation. Patricia stood beside them, her camera ready, but for the first time in 2 years, Emma and Lucas were positioned right in the center of the group rather than at the edges. "Ready, set, hunt," Patricia called, and the children exploded into action like colorful spring missiles, spreading throughout the yard and house in their quest for hidden treasures. The laughter that followed was the sound of pure joy, the kind that comes from children who feel completely safe and completely included. Emma and Lucas moved through the hunt with confidence, their insider knowledge serving them well, but more importantly, they moved like children who belonged. They helped their younger cousin Ethan reach eggs that were placed too high, celebrated with Sophia when she found the legendary golden egg, and shared their own discoveries with the generosity that characterized everything they did. Patricia followed the hunt with her camera, but also with her heart fully engaged, calling out encouragement and sharing in each child's excitement. When Lucas found a particularly well-hidden egg and ran to show her with his face bright with triumph, she swept him up in a hug that looked like it might never end. "Grandma Pat," he said, his arms tight around her neck. "This is the best Easter ever." "It is for me too, sweetheart," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It absolutely is for me too." As the hunt wound down and the children settled on the back porch to examine their treasures, I found myself standing beside Patricia, both of us watching our family with the contentment that comes after a storm has passed and the sun has emerged. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on Emma and Lucas as they shared their candy with their cousins. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for bringing them back here even when I didn't deserve it, for raising children who could see past my fear to the love I was hiding." "They never stopped believing you loved them," I told her honestly. "Even when you hurt them, even when you made them doubt their place here, they never stopped hoping you would choose them." "They chose me first," Patricia said, her voice full of wonder. "They chose me before I chose them, and they kept choosing me even when I was rejecting them. I don't understand that kind of grace, but I'm grateful for it." The afternoon stretched ahead of us, full of promise and possibility, marked by the sound of children's laughter and the warmth of a family finally whole. The crisis that had threatened to tear us apart had instead brought us together in a way that felt stronger and more honest than anything we had built before. As Emma and Lucas settled beside Patricia on the porch swing, their Easter baskets at their feet and their hearts finally at peace, I realized that sometimes the most important family traditions are the ones that begin in moments of healing, in the space where love finally overcomes fear and chooses to stay. 3 months had passed since that transformative Easter Sunday, and the changes in our family felt both profound and beautifully ordinary. Patricia's house had become a true gathering place for Emma and Lucas, not just during scheduled visits, but for spontaneous afternoons when they needed help with homework or wanted to share exciting news from school. The formal dining room where that painful confrontation had occurred now echoed with different sounds entirely. The rustle of construction paper as Emma worked on art projects at the polished table, Lucas's animated voice as he read aloud from library books, and Patricia's patient explanations as she taught both children to cook her signature recipes. The scrapbook project had evolved into something far more comprehensive than any of us had originally envisioned. What began as Patricia's secret documentation of Emma and Lucas's integration into the family had transformed into a collaborative family history that all the grandchildren were contributing to with enthusiasm. Every weekend brought new additions to the growing collection photographs from school events that Patricia now attended religiously, artwork from both children that she displayed with obvious pride, and handwritten stories about family adventures that captured the children's perspectives on becoming Williams' grandchildren. Emma had appointed herself the official family historian, interviewing relatives with the thoroughness of a seasoned journalist and carefully transcribing their responses in her increasingly sophisticated handwriting. Her favorite project had been recording Patricia's stories about Michael's childhood, creating what she called the connection pages that showed how family traits and traditions passed down through generations. Lucas had taken charge of the visual elements, his natural artistic ability flourishing under Patricia's encouragement, as he created illustrated timelines and decorative borders that made each page a work of art. The legal documents Patricia had prepared months earlier had been formally finalized with a ceremony that felt more significant than any of us had anticipated. At Emma's request, we had gathered in Patricia's living room while she explained each document and what it meant for their futures. Both children had listened with serious attention as their grandmother outlined the college funds, the medical provisions, and the inheritance arrangements that placed them on equal footing with every other family member. "This means," Patricia had explained, looking directly into Emma's eyes, "that you are not just loved, you are protected. You are not just welcomed, you are provided for. You are not just accepted, you are claimed." The formality of her words had been undercut by the emotion in her voice, and when she finished speaking, both children had moved to embrace her with the natural affection that now characterized all their interactions. The transformation had rippled outward to affect the entire extended family in ways that surprised everyone. David and Amanda's children had embraced their newfound status as full cousins to Emma and Lucas with enthusiasm, creating elaborate plans for summer adventures and holiday traditions that assumed the two families would remain permanently intertwined. Sophia had declared herself Emma's official best cousin and had taken it upon herself to teach Emma the intricate social dynamics of their private school, while Tyler and Lucas had bonded over their shared love of building projects and spent hours constructing elaborate structures from whatever materials they could commandeer. The most unexpected development had been Patricia's decision to volunteer at Emma and Lucas's elementary school, bringing her decades of teaching experience back into service as a reading tutor and garden coordinator. Her first day volunteering had been emotional for everyone involved, but especially for Emma, who had walked into the library to find her grandmother reading to a group of first graders with the same patience and warmth she had once brought to her own classroom. "That's my Grandma Pat," Emma had announced to anyone within hearing distance, her voice bursting with pride. "She's the best reader in the whole world, and she knows everything about plants and cooking and making people feel important." The casual way she claimed Patricia as her own, the complete absence of the uncertainty that had characterized her earlier references to their relationship, marked how completely their dynamic had shifted. Lucas had been equally excited to discover Patricia in his school environment, particularly when she had offered to help with the school garden project that had been struggling due to lack of adult supervision. His enthusiasm for showing her around the school grounds, introducing her to his teachers, and explaining the various educational programs had revealed how much he had wanted to share his world with her all along. The garden project had become a special bond between Patricia and Lucas, who possessed an innate understanding of growing things that reminded her powerfully of Michael at the same age. Their weekly gardening sessions had evolved into extended conversations about everything from plant biology to life lessons, with Lucas absorbing both knowledge and wisdom with equal eagerness. "Grandma Pat says that gardens and families are similar," Lucas had explained to me after one particularly productive afternoon in the school garden. "They both need good soil and regular attention and lots of patience, and sometimes the best growth happens where you can't see it at first." His 6-year-old interpretation of Patricia's metaphors always managed to capture truths that adults might struggle to articulate. The cooking lessons had become another cornerstone of Emma and Patricia's relationship, with Emma approaching recipe mastery with the same determined perfectionism she brought to all her academic pursuits. Patricia's famous lemon bars had been the first successful project, followed by increasingly complex dishes that required precise timing and careful technique. The kitchen at Patricia's house now contained a special drawer filled with child-sized cooking tools and aprons embroidered with Emma and Lucas's names, tangible evidence of their permanent place in her domestic routines. The secret to good cooking, Patricia had told Emma during one of their weekend baking sessions, is understanding that you're not just preparing food, you're creating memories. Every time someone tastes something you've made with love, they remember that love. Emma had absorbed this lesson with characteristic seriousness, and her subsequent culinary gifts to family members had carried an emotional weight that far exceeded their modest appearances. The photographs that had once been hidden in Patricia's basement were now displayed throughout her house with the same prominence given to images of her other grandchildren. The refrigerator door featured Emma's latest art project alongside Lucas's school photo, while the living room mantel showcased a professional family portrait taken during our most recent visit. The guest bedroom where we stayed during overnight visits had been redecorated to include elements that reflected both children's personalities, transforming the space from generic accommodations to a room that truly belonged to them. School events had become occasions for Patricia to demonstrate her grandmother's status with visible pride. She attended every parent-teacher conference, art show, and seasonal celebration with the dedication of someone making up for lost time. Her presence at these events had initially surprised Emma and Lucas's teachers, who had grown accustomed to seeing only Michael and me at school functions. But her natural ease with children and obvious investment in their academic success had quickly established her as a valued member of their educational support team. The most touching development had been Patricia's creation of what she called grandmother traditions, specifically designed around Emma and Lucas's interests and personalities. For Emma, this meant monthly visits to art museums and galleries, where Patricia's teaching background helped her ask questions that deepened Emma's appreciation for different artistic techniques and historical periods. For Lucas, it meant regular trips to the Oregon Zoo and science museums, where his endless curiosity about how things worked found a receptive audience in Patricia's patient explanations. Both children had developed individual relationships with Patricia that reflected their unique personalities while contributing to a shared sense of belonging that grew stronger with each passing week. Emma's relationship with her grandmother was built on shared intellectual pursuits and creative projects, while Lucas's connection centered on hands-on activities and outdoor adventures. Yet both relationships were characterized by the same fundamental elements: unconditional acceptance, genuine interest in their thoughts and feelings, and consistent demonstration that they mattered deeply to someone beyond their immediate family. The extended family gatherings that had once been sources of anxiety and careful navigation had transformed into genuine celebrations where everyone's presence was valued equally. Holiday planning now automatically included Emma and Lucas in all decision-making, from menu selection to activity coordination, and their suggestions were received with the same consideration given to any other family member's preferences. The subtle hierarchies and careful inclusions that had previously characterized these events had been replaced by natural integration that reflected everyone's understanding that family membership was not conditional or partial. Michael's relationship with his mother had also evolved in unexpected ways as a result of the changes in her connection to Emma and Lucas. The careful distance he had maintained to protect his children from potential hurt had dissolved into something warmer and more open than their relationship had been in years. Patricia's willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and make substantive changes had restored his confidence in her character and his trust in her commitment to their family's well-being. "I think I understand my mother better now than I ever have," Michael had confided to me one evening, as we watched Patricia help both children with their homework at her kitchen table. "I always thought her rigidity was about control, but I think it was actually about fear. Fear of loving people she might lose, fear of change disrupting what she understood about herself, fear of admitting when she was wrong. Watching her overcome those fears to claim Emma and Lucas has shown me who she really is underneath all that protection. The professional development aspects of Patricia's transformation had been equally remarkable. Her volunteer work at the elementary school had rekindled her passion for education and child development, leading to her acceptance of a part-time consulting position with the school district that utilized her decades of classroom experience to mentor new teachers. The work energized her in ways that retirement activities had never quite achieved, and her enthusiasm for sharing educational strategies had found new expression through her involvement in Emma and Lucas's academic lives. Both children had begun to benefit academically from having an experienced educator as an involved grandmother. Patricia's understanding of child development and learning styles had helped identify areas where each child could be challenged and supported more effectively. Emma's writing had flourished under Patricia's guidance, while Lucas's mathematical reasoning had improved significantly through the practical applications Patricia incorporated into their cooking and gardening projects. The ripple effects of Patricia's transformation had extended beyond our immediate family to influence her broader social circle and community involvement. Her church friends had noticed the change in her demeanor and energy, leading to conversations about adoption, family formation, and the different ways love manifests in family relationships. Several of her longtime friends had shared their own experiences with non-traditional family structures, creating a support network that reinforced Patricia's evolving understanding of what constitutes authentic family bonds. The scrapbook project, that had begun as Patricia's secret documentation, had grown into a comprehensive family archive that multiple generations were contributing to with enthusiasm. Emma's interviews with extended family members had uncovered stories and connections that even the adults had forgotten, creating a richer understanding of family history that included everyone's contributions to the collective narrative. Lucas's artistic contributions had evolved from simple decorations to sophisticated illustrations that captured the emotional essence of family milestones and everyday moments. The legal and financial provisions Patricia had established for Emma and Lucas had been complemented by similar gestures from other family members who had been inspired by her example. David and Amanda had updated their own estate planning to include provisions for Emma and Lucas, while other relatives had begun including the children in gift-giving traditions and future planning discussions that demonstrated their permanent place in the extended family structure. The most profound change had been in Emma and Lucas themselves, who had blossomed under the security of knowing their place in the family was unquestioned and permanent. Emma's natural leadership abilities had emerged more confidently as she took on responsibilities within family gatherings and school activities. Lucas's creativity and problem-solving skills had flourished in an environment where his contributions were valued and his perspectives were actively sought. Both children had also developed a sophisticated understanding of family dynamics and the complexities of adult emotions that served them well in navigating other relationships. Their experience of winning over a reluctant grandmother through persistence, patience, and genuine affection had taught them valuable lessons about the power of unconditional love and the importance of giving people opportunities to grow and change. The Easter Sunday confrontation that had initially seemed like a family catastrophe had ultimately revealed itself to be the catalyst for healing that had been necessary for years. Patricia's cruel words had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about exclusion, belonging, and the responsibility that comes with family membership. The children's response had demonstrated the power of grace and forgiveness, while also holding adults accountable for creating environments where children could thrive. Looking back on that painful afternoon, none of us would choose to repeat the hurt that Emma and Lucas experienced, but all of us recognized that the crisis had ultimately strengthened our family bonds in ways that gradual change might never have achieved. The stark contrast between rejection and acceptance had made everyone more conscious of the daily choices that either reinforce or undermine family connections. The story of Emma and Lucas's journey to full acceptance in the Williams family had become a touchstone for other families navigating similar challenges. Patricia's willingness to share her mistakes and growth process had encouraged other grandparents and extended family members to examine their own assumptions about adoptive relationships and non-traditional family formation. Her transformation, from reluctant acceptance to fierce advocacy, had demonstrated that love is indeed a choice that can be made at any stage of a relationship. The children themselves had become ambassadors for the power of persistence and grace in family relationships, though they wore this role lightly and naturally. Their ability to see past adults' fears and defenses to the love underneath had touched everyone who witnessed their journey. Their insistence on treating family membership as an opportunity, rather than an obligation, had created a template for healthy relationship building that extended far beyond their specific situation. As summer approached and plans took shape for expanded family vacations and extended visits, the integration of Emma and Lucas into Patricia's world felt complete and natural. Their presence in her life was no longer something she accommodated, but something she actively sought and protected. The transformation from tolerance to treasure had been thorough and irreversible, creating a foundation for relationships that would continue to deepen and strengthen over the years ahead. The lessons learned during those difficult months had created a family culture that valued honesty, encouraged growth, and prioritized the well-being of its most vulnerable members. Emma and Lucas had taught everyone that belonging is not about meeting external criteria, but about being seen, valued, and chosen consistently over time. Patricia had demonstrated that it is never too late to choose love over fear and that the rewards of vulnerability far exceed the risks of emotional protection. The Williams family that gathered for subsequent holidays and celebrations was fundamentally different from the one that had assembled for that fateful Easter brunch. The differences were visible in the easy affection between Patricia and Emma. And Lucas, in the natural way the children claimed space and attention during family gatherings, and in the obvious pride Patricia took in their accomplishments and growth. But the changes ran deeper than visible interactions to encompass a shared understanding that family love is both powerful enough to overcome significant obstacles and fragile enough to require constant nurturing and protection. Emma and Lucas had claimed their inheritance not just of financial security and legal protection, but of emotional belonging and unconditional acceptance. They had won the love they deserved through the simple expedient of being themselves consistently and courageously, refusing to accept anything less than full family membership, while extending grace to the adults who needed time to grow into their roles. Patricia had reclaimed her role as family matriarch in ways that honored both tradition and innovation, creating new customs that reflected the diverse ways families form while maintaining the values and practices that had sustained previous generations. Her transformation had required courage, humility, and a willingness to prioritize love over pride. But the rewards had exceeded anything she could have imagined when she began the journey. The story that began with rejection and exclusion had evolved into a testament to the power of redemption and the possibility of second chances. It had demonstrated that families are indeed made through choice and commitment rather than biology alone, and that the strongest family bonds are often those that must be consciously created and carefully tended rather than simply assumed. As I watched Patricia, Emma, and Lucas work together in her garden on a warm June afternoon, their heads bent over seedlings they had started from scratch months earlier, I marveled at how naturally they had grown into their relationships with each other. The careful distance and formal politeness of earlier interactions had been replaced by easy intimacy and genuine affection that felt like it had always existed. "Mom," Emma called to me from across the garden, her face bright with excitement. "Grandma Pat says these tomatoes should be ready to harvest by my birthday. We're going to make sauce together and can it so we can have it all winter long." The casual way she planned for future seasons, the automatic assumption that she would continue to be part of Patricia's world for years to come, captured how completely her sense of belonging had been restored. "And I'm going to help too," Lucas added, not wanting to be left out of any family planning. Grandma Pat is teaching me how to tell when vegetables are perfectly ripe, and she says I have good instincts for growing things. His pride in Patricia's assessment was evident, and the confidence in his voice reflected how much he had grown under her consistent encouragement and attention. Patricia looked up from the plant she was examining, her face glowing with the satisfaction that comes from nurturing growth in all its forms. These children have taught me more about family than 40 years of marriage and motherhood ever did, she said, her voice full of wonder. They've shown me that love is not something you fall into by accident, but something you choose to build deliberately, one small act of care at a time. The wisdom in her words captured the essence of what our family had learned through its journey from rejection to acceptance, from fear to love, from exclusion to belonging. Emma and Lucas had not just found their place in the Williams family. They had helped create a stronger, more conscious version of that family that was better equipped to love and support all its members. The transformation that began with two children's brave presentation about what makes a family had ultimately touched every person connected to our story. It had demonstrated that the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest voices, that courage can be found in unexpected places, and that love is indeed strong enough to overcome the deepest fears when given the opportunity to flourish. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Patricia's garden and the sound of children's laughter mingled with adult conversation, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment of peace and connection. The family we had become was stronger than the one we had been before, not because we had avoided conflict, but because we had faced it honestly and chosen love in the aftermath of pain. Emma and Lucas had won more than their grandmother's acceptance. They had won the chance to help create a family culture that valued every member equally and celebrated the different ways that love manifests in human relationships. Their victory was not just personal but generational, creating a legacy of inclusion and grace that would influence how future family members understood their obligations to each other. The story that began with a mother-in-law's rejection and two children's tears had become a testament to the power of persistence, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that every child deserves to belong somewhere completely and permanently. It had proven that families are not just born, but made, not just inherited, but chosen, and that the strongest family bonds are those that survive testing and emerge even more resilient than before. The summer heat in Salem had given way to the crisp promise of autumn, and Patricia's backyard had transformed into a canvas of gold and crimson that provided the perfect backdrop for what had become our new family tradition, the monthly Williams Family Storytelling Circle. What began as an extension of the scrapbook project had evolved into something far more meaningful, a gathering where multiple generations came together to share memories, celebrate milestones, and weave the ongoing narrative of who we were becoming as a family. Emma sat cross-legged on the weathered wooden deck, a leather-bound journal balanced on her knees as she carefully transcribed the stories being shared around the circle. At 9 years old, she had appointed herself the official family chronicler, and her dedication to capturing every detail with accuracy and care had impressed even Patricia, whose own attention to detail was legendary. The journal had been Patricia's gift to Emma on her 9th birthday, along with a beautiful fountain pen that had belonged to Patricia's own grandmother, creating a tangible link between past and present that Emma treasured above all her other possessions. "Tell us about the time Dad tried to build that treehouse," Lucas requested, his 7-year-old voice bright with anticipation, even though he had heard this particular story countless times before. He was sprawled on his stomach beside Patricia's chair, using colored pencils to create an illustrated family tree that had grown increasingly elaborate with each storytelling session. His artistic abilities had flourished under Patricia's encouragement, and his drawings had become treasured additions to the family archive they were building together. Michael groaned dramatically from his position on the porch swing, but his eyes were twinkling with the kind of good humor that came from being surrounded by people who loved him enough to tease him gently. "I was 12 years old," he protested. And I had very ambitious ideas about architecture that weren't necessarily grounded in practical engineering knowledge. Patricia's laughter was rich and warm as she settled deeper into her favorite outdoor chair, the one that had been positioned to give her the best view of both the garden she had lovingly tended for decades and the family that had grown to fill her life with purpose and joy. "Your father," she said, addressing Emma and Lucas with the conspiratorial tone she used when sharing particularly delicious family secrets, decided that the maple tree in the corner of the yard needed a treehouse that could accommodate not just himself, but also a complete library, a telescope for stargazing, and a pulley system for transporting snacks. "That sounds like a really good treehouse," Lucas said seriously, his pencil pausing over the drawing he was creating. "What happened to it?" "Well," Patricia continued, her eyes dancing with mischief, "your father spent 3 weeks collecting materials, drawing blueprints, and explaining to anyone who would listen how his treehouse was going to revolutionize backyard entertainment. He had calculated weight distributions, researched the best wood treatments, and even designed a rainwater collection system." "Mom," Michael warned, but he was smiling despite himself. "You're making me sound like I was completely obsessed." "Because you were completely obsessed," David chimed in from his position on the deck stairs, where he was keeping half an eye on his own children as they played in the yard. "You talked about that treehouse constantly for months. You drew diagrams. During math class, you checked out every book about construction the library had, and you convinced Dad to take you to the hardware store every Saturday to price materials." Amanda laughed from her spot on the porch rail, where she was enjoying the warm afternoon sun. "This is the best part of the story," she said to Emma and Lucas. "Wait until you hear what actually happened when he started building." Patricia's expression grew even more amused as she continued the tale. "Your father had everything planned perfectly on paper, but when it came time to actually construct his masterpiece, he discovered that there's a significant difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application. The first board he tried to attach to the tree fell to the ground before he had even finished hammering in the second nail." "Did it hurt the tree?" Emma asked with the environmental consciousness that characterized her approach to most situations. "No, sweetheart, the tree was fine," Patricia assured her. "But your father's pride took quite a beating. Instead of scaling back his ambitions or asking for help, he decided that the problem was that he wasn't thinking big enough. So he redesigned the entire project to be even more elaborate." Lucas looked up from his drawing with the kind of intense curiosity that made him such a delightful child to teach. "More elaborate how?" Michael buried his face in his hands with exaggerated embarrassment. "Please tell me you're not going to include the part about the water slide." "The water slide?" Emma's voice rose with excitement. "There was going to be a water slide?" "Oh yes," Patricia said, clearly enjoying herself immensely. "By the second week of construction, your father had decided that a simple treehouse wasn't sufficient. He wanted to add a slide that would deposit riders directly into a kiddie pool, a rope bridge connecting to the oak tree on the other side of the yard, and a zip line that would carry passengers all the way to the front porch." The children's faces were bright with wonder and amusement as they tried to imagine their practical, methodical father as a 12-year-old dreamer with unlimited ambitions and very limited construction skills. The story had become a family favorite not just because of its humor, but because it revealed a side of Michael that his children rarely got to see. The part of him that had once been willing to dream impossibly big dreams and take on challenges. That seemed far beyond his capabilities. "What actually got built?" Lucas asked, returning to his drawing but keeping his attention focused on Patricia's storytelling. After 6 weeks of planning, replanning, and increasingly frustrated attempts at construction, Patricia said, your father had managed to create what could generously be described as a platform. It was about 4 feet off the ground, accessible by a ladder that wobbled alarmingly, and it had exactly enough space for one person to sit uncomfortably. But did it work? Emma wanted to know. her practical nature asserting itself even in the face of such an obviously doomed project. "It worked for exactly one afternoon," Michael admitted, his voice full of rueful memory. "I invited my best friend Tommy over to see my architectural masterpiece, and we spent about an hour up there feeling very proud of what I had accomplished. Then Tommy leaned against what I had assumed was a load-bearing support beam, and the entire structure collapsed." "Was anyone hurt?" Lucas asked with concern. "Only my ego," Michael replied. "And possibly my father's patience, since he had to help me clean up the wreckage and dispose of all the materials I had convinced him to buy for my grand project." Patricia reached over to pat Michael's shoulder with affectionate sympathy. "But you learned valuable lessons about project management, realistic goal setting, and the importance of asking for help when you're attempting something beyond your current skill level." "And," David added with brotherly glee, "he never again attempted any construction project without extensive consultation with people who actually knew what they were doing." The laughter that followed this story was the kind that comes from genuine affection and shared history, the sound of people who had learned to find joy in each other's quirks and failures as much as in their successes. Emma carefully noted the key details of the story in her journal, adding her own observations about what the tale revealed about her father's character and how it connected to other family stories they had collected. "I think Dad's treehouse story shows that it's okay to dream big, even if you don't know how to make your dreams come true yet," she said thoughtfully, her 9-year-old wisdom cutting to the heart of why these family stories mattered so much. "And it shows that families remember the funny parts more than the embarrassing parts." "That's exactly right," Patricia agreed, her voice warm with pride in Emma's insight. "And it shows that some of our best family stories come from our most spectacular failures, because those are the times when we learn the most about ourselves and each other." Lucas had finished adding details to his family tree drawing and was now working on what appeared to be an illustration of Michael's doomed treehouse, complete with wildly optimistic architectural features that defied both gravity and common sense. His artistic interpretation captured not just the physical impossibility of the project, but somehow also the enthusiasm and determination that had driven his father's 12-year-old ambitions. "Grandma Pat," Lucas said as he worked, "will you tell us about when you were our age? What kinds of things did you try to build or make?" Patricia's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the question. The storytelling circle had become a place where she had learned to share not just the polished family legends, but also the more personal memories that revealed her own journey from childhood dreams to adult responsibilities. "When I was about Emma's age," she began, "I decided that I was going to become a famous author and illustrator of children's books. I had read every book in our local library's children's section, and I was convinced that I could create stories that would be even more wonderful than anything that had already been published." "Did you write stories?" Emma asked, her own love of creative writing making her particularly interested in this revelation about her grandmother's childhood ambitions. "Oh, I wrote dozens of stories," Patricia said, her voice full of nostalgic amusement. "I had a special notebook that I carried everywhere, and I filled it with tales about talking animals, magical kingdoms, and brave children who saved the day through cleverness and determination. I illustrated each story with careful drawings, and I even designed elaborate covers with titles written in my most impressive handwriting." "What happened to them?" Lucas wanted to know, looking up from his drawing with curious interest. "Well," Patricia continued, "I decided that the logical next step was to get my stories published so that children all over the world could enjoy them. So I researched how to submit manuscripts to publishers, and I carefully typed up my 3 best stories on my mother's old typewriter." The family was listening with rapt attention now, drawn into Patricia's story by the same storytelling skill that had made her such an effective teacher for so many years. Even the adults seemed surprised by this glimpse into her childhood dreams, suggesting that this was a story she had never shared before. "I mailed my stories to 5 different publishing companies," Patricia said, along with cover letters that I had crafted to sound as professional and adult as possible. I was absolutely convinced that at least one publisher would recognize my obvious talent and offer me a contract immediately. Did they? Emma asked breathlessly. They did not, Patricia said with a laugh. What I received instead were 5 very polite rejection letters that thanked me for my submission and encouraged me to continue developing my craft. I was devastated. I had been so certain that my stories were perfect exactly as they were. And the rejection felt like a personal judgment on my worth as a creative person. That must have been really disappointing, Lucas said with the empathy that made him such a compassionate child. It was crushing, Patricia admitted. I was so discouraged that I put my notebook away and didn't write another story for almost a year. I told myself that if professional publishers didn't appreciate my work, then maybe I wasn't meant to be a writer after all. The circle had grown quiet as everyone absorbed this story of childhood disappointment and the way it had shaped Patricia's understanding of creative ambition. Emma was taking careful notes, clearly recognizing the importance of documenting not just the funny family stories, but also the moments of vulnerability and growth that revealed how people became who they were. But then, Patricia continued, something interesting happened. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson, announced that our class was going to create a collection of original stories to share with the kindergarten classes. She asked for volunteers to write and illustrate tales that would be appropriate for very young children. Did you volunteer? Emma asked, already sensing where the story was heading. I almost didn't, Patricia said. I was still stinging from those rejection letters, and I was afraid that my classmates would think my stories were childish or silly. But Mrs. Henderson had a way of encouraging students to take risks, and she specifically asked me to participate because she had noticed how much I enjoyed the creative writing assignments we did in class. So you wrote a new story, Lucas guessed. I did. I wrote a story about a little rabbit who was afraid to try new things because she worried about failing in front of other animals. The rabbit spent so much time avoiding challenges that she missed out on adventures and friendships, until finally an older, wiser rabbit helped her understand that trying and failing was better than never trying at all. The parallel between Patricia's story and her own recent journey with Emma and Lucas was not lost on anyone in the circle. Michael reached over to take his mother's hand, a gesture of understanding and appreciation for the courage it had taken her to share such a personal memory. What happened when you shared the story with the kindergarten children? Emma asked. Patricia's face lit up with the memory. It was magical. Those 5- and 6-year-olds listened with complete attention, asked thoughtful questions about the rabbit's feelings, and several of them told me it was their new favorite story. One little boy even asked if I could write more stories about the same rabbit character. Did you? Lucas wanted to know. I wrote rabbit stories for the rest of that school year, Patricia said. Not for publishers or fame, but for the joy of creating something that brought happiness to children who were just discovering the power of stories. And that experience taught me that success isn't always about achieving your original dreams, but sometimes about finding new ways to use your talents that you never expected. Emma looked up from her journal with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. Is that why you became a teacher instead of a famous author? Partly, Patricia said. I realized that what I loved most about writing stories wasn't the idea of being famous, but the connection I felt with young readers and the opportunity to spark their imagination. Teaching gave me the chance to do that every day, with hundreds of children over the years, in ways that were even more rewarding than I had imagined when I dreamed of seeing my name on book covers. The afternoon had grown later, while they shared stories and the light filtering through the trees had taken on the golden quality that made everything look slightly magical. Patricia's garden was at its most beautiful, with late-season flowers blooming in carefully planned succession and vegetables reaching peak ripeness in the beds that Emma and Lucas had helped tend throughout the growing season. I think, Emma said thoughtfully, closing her journal and setting it carefully aside. That the best thing about family stories is that they help us understand that everyone has dreams and disappointments and surprises, even grown-ups and even grandparents. And, Lucas added, putting the finishing touches on his treehouse illustration, they help us know that our family is full of interesting people who tried lots of different things and learned lots of different lessons that they can share with us. Patricia looked around the circle at the faces of her family. These people who had taught her that love could grow and change and strengthen in ways she had never imagined possible. The storytelling tradition that had begun as a way to document their shared history had become something much more valuable, a practice that created space for vulnerability, connection, and the kind of deep understanding that comes from truly knowing each other's stories. "You know," she said, her voice rich with emotion, "when I started that scrapbook project months ago, I thought I was preserving memories for you children to look at when you got older. But I realize now that what we've really been doing is creating something much more important than a record of the past. We've been building a foundation for the future." The truth of her words settled over the group like a blessing. The stories they shared, the memories they preserved, and the connections they strengthened through these regular gatherings were indeed creating something that would last far beyond any individual family member's lifetime. They were establishing patterns of communication, understanding, and love that would influence how future generations understood their responsibilities to each other. Michael squeezed Patricia's hand and looked around at his children, his brother's family, and the wife who had brought such joy and purpose to all their lives. "I think what we've learned this year is that families aren't just about who we're related to, but about who we choose to show up for, again and again, especially when it's difficult. And," Amanda added, "that it's never too late to make different choices, to apologize for mistakes, and to build something better than what came before." David nodded in agreement. "The kids have taught us that love is both simpler and more complicated than we thought. Simpler because it really does come down to seeing each other clearly and choosing connection over protection. More complicated because it requires ongoing work and attention and willingness to be vulnerable." Emma had been listening to this adult conversation with the absorbed attention she brought to anything that helped her understand how the world worked. "I think," she said, "that what makes our family special now isn't that we never have problems, but that we talk about our problems and work together to solve them. And we remember that everyone makes mistakes," Lucas added. "But what matters is what you do after you realize you made a mistake." Patricia felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to these children articulate wisdom that had taken her decades to learn. Their journey from rejection to acceptance had taught all of them lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of persistent love that would serve them well throughout their lives. The storytelling circle gradually dispersed as evening approached, with family members heading home to school night routines and workday preparations. But the connections forged during these afternoon gatherings lingered, creating a sense of continuity and belonging that enriched every aspect of their daily lives. As Patricia helped Emma pack up her journal and Lucas gathered his art supplies, she marveled at how natural these interactions had become. The careful politeness and walking on eggshells dynamic that had characterized their relationship for the first 2 years had been completely replaced by easy affection and genuine partnership in the work of building family bonds. "Grandma Pat?" Emma said as she zipped her journal into its protective case. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I think maybe you and Dad both learned the same lesson from your childhood stories, just in different ways," Emma said, her thoughtful expression indicating that she had been processing the afternoon's narratives on multiple levels. "What lesson is that?" "That sometimes the thing you think you want isn't the thing that will actually make you happy," Emma explained. "Dad thought he wanted to build the most amazing treehouse ever, but what made him happy was spending time with family and learning that it's okay to fail sometimes. And you thought you wanted to be a famous author, but what made you happy was helping children love stories and learning. Patricia stared at her 9-year-old granddaughter with amazement. That's exactly right, Emma. And what about you and Lucas? What do you think you've learned about the difference between what you thought you wanted and what actually makes you happy? Emma considered the question seriously. I thought I wanted a grandmother who loved me the same way she loved her other grandchildren, she said slowly. But what I actually got was better than that. I got a grandmother who had to choose to love me, which means her love is extra strong because she made it on purpose. Lucas looked up from organizing his colored pencils with characteristic precision. And I thought I wanted to belong to a family where everyone was the same, he said. But I learned that families are more interesting when everyone brings different things, and that being chosen is better than just being stuck with each other. The profound wisdom in these children's reflections left Patricia momentarily speechless. They had articulated truths about love, choice, and family formation that many adults struggled to understand, and they had done so with the clarity that comes from having lived through transformation rather than simply observing it. You two, she said, pulling them both into a hug that felt like it might last forever, have taught this old grandmother more about what really matters than 40 years of teaching ever did. You've shown me that the best families are the ones that choose each other deliberately and keep choosing each other every day. As they walked toward the house together, Patricia's arms around both children's shoulders, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to reflect the warmth and contentment that had become the hallmark of their family gatherings. The painful Easter Sunday that had precipitated their transformation felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a year since Emma and Lucas had stood in Patricia's dining room presenting their case for belonging. The changes that had occurred since that day extended far beyond the resolution of one family conflict. They had created a template for how love could overcome fear, how patience could triumph over prejudice, and how children's wisdom could guide adults toward better versions of themselves. The story of their family's healing had become a source of inspiration for other families navigating similar challenges, proof that it was never too late to choose love over protection, inclusion over exclusion, grace over judgment. Inside the Fee house, Patricia began preparing the light supper that had become traditional after their storytelling sessions, while Emma and Lucas helped set the table and continued processing the afternoon's conversations. The easy domesticity of these moments, the casual way the children moved through her space and contributed to her routines, represented everything she had almost lost through her own fear and stubbornness. Next week, Lucas announced as he carefully arranged napkins at each place setting. I want to hear the story about when Mom and Dad decided to adopt us. Emma interviewed them already for the journal, but I want to hear it told like a story, with all the feelings and everything. That's a beautiful idea, Patricia agreed. And maybe we can also talk about what we're grateful for as we head into the holidays this year. Emma looked up from the glasses she was filling with water. I'm grateful that grown-ups can change their minds about important things, she said. And I'm grateful that families can get stronger instead of weaker when they go through hard times. I'm grateful for second chances, Lucas added, and for grandmothers who love us enough to admit when they're wrong. Patricia felt her heart swell with pride and love for these remarkable children who had refused to accept anything less than her best self. Their faith in her capacity for growth had enabled her own transformation, and their forgiveness had made it possible for her to forgive herself for the time she had wasted in fear and resistance. As they sat down to share their simple meal together, Patricia looked around the table at Emma and Lucas chattering about school projects and weekend plans, their faces bright with the security that comes from knowing beyond doubt that you belong exactly where you are. The family she had almost lost through her own limitations had become the source of her greatest joy and deepest satisfaction. The story that had begun with cruel words and broken hearts had evolved into a testament to the power of persistent love and the possibility of redemption. It had proven that families are indeed made through daily choices, rather than genetic accidents, and that the strongest bonds are often those that must be consciously created and carefully maintained rather than simply assumed. The evening ahead would be filled with homework help, bedtime stories, and the comfortable routines that marked their life together. But it would also be filled with the deeper satisfaction that comes from knowing that love had triumphed over fear, that courage had overcome prejudice, and that two remarkable children had taught an entire family what it really meant to choose each other completely and permanently. The Williams family that gathered around Patricia's dinner table that autumn evening was fundamentally different from the one that had assembled for Easter brunch months earlier. They had learned that belonging is not about meeting external criteria, but about being seen, valued, and chosen consistently over time. They had discovered that the most profound family connections are often those that require the most conscious effort to create and maintain. Most importantly, they had proven that it is never too late to choose love over fear, acceptance over rejection, and grace over judgment. Emma and Lucas had won more than their grandmother's affection. They had helped create a family culture that valued every member equally and celebrated the different ways that love manifests in human relationships. Their victory was not just personal but generational, creating a legacy of inclusion and intentional love that would influence how future family members understood their obligations to each other. The story that began with rejection had become a foundation for understanding that the best families are those that choose each other deliberately and keep choosing each other through every challenge and change that life brings. As laughter echoed around Patricia's dinner table and plans took shape for the week ahead, the transformation that had begun with two children's brave presentation about what makes a family had reached its most beautiful conclusion. A family that was stronger, more conscious, and more loving than it had ever been before, bound together not by obligation or tradition alone, but by the daily choice to see each other clearly and love each other completely. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.